When I think back to Northeastern, some of the most profound and impactful moments of my education, not surprisingly, came outside the classroom. Of course, there's the co-op program. I worked at the Boston Globe, where I had the chance, see, he said, turn right and you'll echo, turn left and they won't hear you. Where I had the chance to cover a murder in Charlestown, a fire at Old Dooley's barn, and the birth of a baby giraffe, which made a bit of history at a New England zoo. Those clips were essential in helping me get my first job. The second most important thing for me at Northeastern University was the Northeastern News, where we really had license to be inventive and probing. It was a different time, and still the school was very, very supportive, even when they didn't want me to publish, which was more often than you would suspect. But they did. They made their case, they trusted us, and they let us publish. But one of the moments I want to share with you that sticks out the most for me was in the basement of a friend's home in Newton, when her father sat me down, asked me my career plans, and when I said I wanted to be a reporter, asked me what my backup plan was. I have to tell you, I still remember this. I get goosebumps. I was completely stunned. I had no idea what he meant. Backup plan? I was going to be a reporter. Northeastern, my family, my friends, no one ever talked to me about a backup plan. You might think with co-op and the emphasis on employment that Northeastern is the opposite of a place that grows crazy dreams, but I found it just the opposite. I was working at the Boston Globe. A career in journalism was absolutely possible. Backup plan? Meh. That's a technical term. Often when I give these kinds of talks, I'm asked how I ended up at the Times. It's a long story of luck, perseverance, and a little more luck. But there's one key element that I think made the difference that saw me through. And that's that I fundamentally believe in the mission of journalism. First, let me tell you about Irving Kravsow. I'm sure he was a nice man. I never met him, which is part of the story. Mr. Kravsow was an editor at the Hartford Courant. For some reason, and I still can't quite figure this out, when I was starting out, I had my heart set on working at the Hartford Courant. Not that many people want to get to Hartford, but I really wanted to get there. So I did what you did back in the day. I wrote a cover letter, I sent my clips, I did it on an electric typewriter that my mother gave me as a graduation gift. A few days later, I received a reply from Mr. Kravsow saying he'd keep my materials on file. So I wrote back saying, I appreciate that. Can I come up for an interview just so I can introduce myself? And he immediately wrote back a one-line letter, said, Mr. Slackman, we cannot now or ever offer you an editorial opportunity at the Hartford Courant. I still have this letter. Bam, literally, that was a door slamming shut. So what did I do? I worked harder, I read more, I wrote more, I started small and kept at it. I worked my way from the Portchester Daily Item in Portchester, New York, circulation 10,000, to Long Island Newsday, to the Los Angeles Times, and eventually to the New York Times. I was very lucky. I've had the privilege to work in Russia, the Middle East, and Europe. I've covered wars in Kosovo, Chechnya, and Iraq. I've interviewed kings and presidents, emirs and princes. I have been on teams that twice won the Pulitzer. But instead of all that malarkey, that's really just for my obit, let me tell you two quick stories that really matter to me. One is about teeth, the other is about garbage. First, teeth. My first overseas assignment was to Moscow. It was in 1998. The ruble had just crashed, and I had been a police reporter on Long Island. And the story was really on the street in Moscow. How do you live if your entire life saving has become devalued, if the money that you have in the bank, you've stashed under your mattress, can do no more than paper your bathroom? So one of the first days I was there, I went out to a vegetable market, and I was interviewing a woman who was buying rotten vegetables. She was wearing kind of old clothes and dragging behind her a shopping cart. And toward the end of the interview, I noticed she smiled and she had gold teeth. Now, I grew up in the Bronx in the 70s. Gold teeth in the Bronx in the 70s was bling. So when the woman walked away, I turned to my translator, indignant, and I said, what's with the gold teeth? The woman can't afford to eat, and she has gold teeth. And my translator explained to me that gold teeth in the Soviet Union was a sign of poverty. The Soviet Union did not have the money and resources to bring in porcelain dentistry. Gold is a soft metal, and it's easily shoved and jammed into people's mouths. So what I saw as bling, in fact, was a sign of poverty. Now garbage. Some years later, I moved to Cairo, and I lived in a leafy neighborhood of largely expats. I used to go jogging, which was a sight in itself because I wore shorts. After 8 years in Cairo, if I see a man in shorts, I blush. But at the time, I still wore shorts. There was, I would run through this very Egyptian neighborhood. It was a middle-class neighborhood. Most of the people worked for the government, made a decent salary. And in the middle of the neighborhood was a pile of trash. I don't mean like loose garbage. I mean like kitchen bags of trash. Like they had taken it from their kitchens and thrown it out their window. And I was very judgmental. I thought, wow, you'll excuse my French, but why do you shit where you eat? This is where people live. Why are they throwing their garbage out in the middle of their neighborhood? Over the weeks that I jogged that route, this is what I saw happen. People would descend on the garbage, they'd rip open the bags, and they'd pull out anything that could be recycled. Paper, plastic, wood, everything. Every piece of potentially recyclable material was taken out, sold, and recycled. Then all you had was a stinking heap of organic material, and this is in the middle of the city. Well, not the middle of the city, but it's an urban area. These ladies would show up with goats and sheep, and they'd sit down in the middle of this disgusting pile of organic kitchen waste, and the animals would eat everything. When the whole pile was gone, some kid from the neighborhood would come over, and he'd sweep the plastic into a little center, they'd burn it, and it would be completely gone. What I thought was disgusting was the most efficient recycling system probably in the world. Cairo, a city of 20 million people, recycles everything. So why am I telling you this? Because one of the most important things I learned as a correspondent working far from home is that what you see is not always what you get. If you only view the world through the prism of your own experience, you are going to get things wrong. This is a really important lesson, at least it was for me. Here we are, more connected than at any time in our history, and yet we often do not really hear what is being said because of the horns in the background. Because we don't know how to listen. Words matter. Language matters. Cultural context matters. Just imagine, if I don't understand what gold teeth represent, or what that pile of garbage in the middle of a neighborhood demonstrates, how will I understand the complexities of human relationships or world affairs? This is one of the main reasons journalism matters. At its best, it serves as a window onto other perspectives, other worlds, other values. What's the difference between a martyr and a terrorist? Often it's a matter of perspective. I always tell foreign correspondents before they go abroad for the first time, remember, what you see is not always what you get. When I lived in Moscow, I could not understand why people would not smile when I took their picture. So I said to my friend Lena one time, Lena, would you please smile? I don't get why you guys don't smile. And she looked at me and said, really? Because we don't know what you're smiling about. The second most important thing, I usually get a bigger laugh with that, but the second most important thing I lived when I was working abroad was about democracy. What is democracy? I thought it was about elections and institutions and laws, and to some extent, it is all that. But I learned what I think is the deeper meaning of democracy in a funny place. It was in the kitchen, actually the living room, later the kitchen because we went to eat, of a political dissident's home in Iran. In Tehran, the capital. The man's name was Ibrahim Yazdi. Mr. Yazdi was one of the founding fathers of the Islamic Republic. He was very close with Ayatollah Khomeini. When Khomeini returned from Paris, I don't know if you recall this, but he came down the stairs of an airplane barefoot. Mr. Yazdi was right behind him. But Mr. Yazdi believed in Islamic democracy, and he thought that the people that had come to power in Iran were becoming the flip side of the Shah. Dictators, autocrats, tyrannical, but through the prism of religion. So he created a political party to try to promote what he thought would be religious democracy. They deemed him a founding father, an enemy of the state. Anyway, sorry, I'm making the story too long, but was sitting in his living room, this big cage of parakeets, I recall. And he said to me that democracy is not about mechanics, it's about values. And those values can be summed up this way: diversity, tolerance, compromise. You cannot have a democracy without diversity of views. You cannot have a democracy without a tolerance for competing opinions. And you cannot have a democracy without a willingness to compromise. Diversity, tolerance, compromise. This is another reason I became a journalist, to have the chance to see the world through others' perspectives and then share that perspective broadly. The goal is to increase understanding of each other and to make democracy possible. Seriously, you can't have democracy without an educated electorate. Journalism, a free and open press, is central to that. I hope this doesn't sound hallmarky, but this is absolutely from my heart. Citizens in a democracy need to be able to make informed decisions, smart choices. Powerful institutions need to know that someone is watching. Who, if not a free press? But journalism is more than that. Journalism is about bearing witness. It's about giving voice to the oppressed. It's about holding the powerful to account. It's about helping explain an increasingly complicated world to each other. I have to add another one. It's also about explaining Donald Trump to the rest of the world. Who would care about the Rohingya if not for the brave journalists who have risked their own safety to report on their persecution? 2 journalists are now in prison for reporting on a massacre. They're in prison. They've given up their own liberty to report. Who would be talking about Yemen, and we're not talking about it enough, if not for a press determined to remind the world of the worst humanitarian crisis on our planet? In Syria, what a tragedy. Half the population forced from their homes, hundreds of thousands killed. Who would be talking about Syria if not for the brave journalists who have made every effort to keep up with this conflict? This is when we show the video. Yeah. So why did I show you that? It was one of the dumbest things I ever did, being at the front of that protest. And when my wife looked at it, she said, 50-year-old guy, slightly overweight, running through the desert, time to be an editor. Anyway, the reason I showed you that is because the story of Bahrain is central to kind of the message that I wanted to leave you with today. Bahrain is a small island in the Persian Gulf that is a majority Shiites, ruled by a Sunni royalty aligned with Saudi Arabia. I happened to be there at the birth of the Arab Spring in Bahrain. It was just a coincidence. I was actually based in Berlin at the time. I happened to be there for that. And what I saw was remarkable. What I saw was tens of thousands of people come to the street in peaceful protest, not demanding the overthrow of their government, demanding hope and opportunity. Think about it. rule of law, lack of corruption, ability to send their kids to school, ability to get jobs. It was 100% peaceful. The government of Bahrain sent out the police force. It was a paramilitary force, and don't show it again. And over the course of 4 or 5 days, I witnessed them shooting innocent people, some of them asleep, some of them being shot dead, in an effort to disband what had become a peaceful protest demanding change, hope, and opportunity. On the last day that I was there, this is when this happened, I was at a funeral of a young man who had been killed, and there were thousands of people out at the cemetery. And after the father just broke down as he buried his son, that group you saw marching up the street decided they were going to march to the hospital. The hospital had become kind of a safe zone, a safe haven for the opposition, as hospitals often are. They're marching up the street chanting peaceful, 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 and I happened to be marching. Well, no, I wasn't marching, but I was walking with them. And the hospital was to the right and Pearl Square was to the left. That was where the army was. And I remember thinking, uh-oh, because they turned left to make a statement, and they marched into a heavily armed area of Pearl Square. The army opened fire with it was actually the military at this point. A couple of kids got hit in the head with bullets. The light pole by me got hit, and we ran. The videographer I was with had never been on a foreign assignment before. He was newly married. And that's why the camera was kind of shaky. Anyway, so we ran. I stopped. I gave this stand-up, and this Bell and Howell helicopter provided to the Bahrain government by the United States flew over us and opened fire. Now, it was literally one of those moments where time slows down. There's like puffs of sand, around you. We ran, we hid behind the retaining wall, and the helicopter followed us. It was really the most scared I had ever been. Looking it up, seeing the belly of this helicopter, thinking, I can't believe this is happening. And a car pulled up, and we jumped in, and this guy took us away and said, where do you want to go, Saudi Arabia? I said, no, just back to the hotel. So why am I telling you this? Because the government of Bahrain went out. It created a shit show after we put this video up. The State Department got involved. It was a political crisis. Hillary Clinton got involved. Anyway, the government of Bahrain, what did they do? They went out and they hired a high-priced reputation protection firm from the United Kingdom who worked night and day to change the narrative of what had happened, what I had witnessed, both what happened to me and what I had witnessed happening across Bahrain. These were not peaceful protesters. These were Iranian-backed terrorists who were destroying things and had to be stopped. This reporter is lying. He was not shot at. I was at the press conference where they were saying this, and I raised my hand and I said, I was shot at. And they said, no, you were not shot at. You were not shot at. And this company spent the next years assiduously working to rewrite the narrative of what happened in Bahrain to fit what it is that the government and its allies in Saudi Arabia wanted. And if not for the press, if not for the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and anyone else, the Washington Post, who went to Bahrain, if not for the press, they would have succeeded in changing the history of what had happened. They would have succeeded in whitewashing what was literally a massacre of the people of Bahrain who had come out for a peaceful protest and laid it all off on terrorism. As a journalist, we struggle to make sure these things don't happen. We make sure that history is correct. We do what we can to make sure the record is straight. Do we make mistakes? Sometimes. But it's always in the service of our mission. Thank you.
Thank you.